My name is Chris Tucker. I'm chairman of the American Geographical Society and author of a book entitled A Planet of 3 Billion. So a quarter of a century ago, I happened to be at the inaugural lecture of Columbia University's Earth Institute, and the title of the lecture was How Many People Can the Earth Support? By Professor Joel Cohen. And that question came to haunt me for a long time. It seemed to me that it's probably the most important question all of us should be asking each other. But I didn't necessarily fully appreciate his answer. And unfortunately, it took me a quarter of a century to write down my own answer and put it out in a book. How many people can the Earth support? A lot of people like to go back to Thomas Malthus and say, the amount of food that is required to deal with this growing population, we're unable to keep up. And I think that was maybe a useful framing back in the late 1700s, but not for today. So it's really not a Malthusian question. It's really, do we fully appreciate the overall ecological footprint that humanity has on our planet? And at what point did we exceed that carrying capacity of the planet and begin generating more waste and deleting more ecological goods and services on our planet, and generating ecological debt that we can't really repay? Yeah, so a planet of 3 billion is really my answer to Joel Cohen's question, how many people can the Earth support? Where instead of thinking about how many people can you feed, the question is, how many people fundamentally can the Earth support without generating ecological debt at such an alarming rate that it actually overwhelms the planet that we live on, the planet that supports us as a species? Population control is a term that I just reject. There are a lot of discussion from the middle of the 20th century was about, people, certain kinds of people being a problem for the planet. And I think that's a fundamentally wrong way to look at it. But along the way, one of the things that we all learned, was that the empowerment of women and girls through empowering strategies can actually bend that population curve and lead us to a more sustainable population that lives within the boundaries of our planet. So it just turns out that every geography where women are empowered, educated, integrated into the workforce, and have access to family planning technologies, the fertility rate, it turns out to be about break even or even below replacement value.
I guess to where they are now.
Yeah, so this means it's really not about population control and compelling people through coercive strategies to procreate in one pattern or another. It's about empowering people to do what they would like to do. Through empowering strategies in women and girls, we can actually bend that population curve in ways that allow them to make their own choices in the types of environments that they choose to live in.
Can you talk about?
So in my mind, there's actually 3 curves that need to be bent simultaneously. The first one is the population curve. We need to continue and actually hasten the inevitable demographic transition that's been happening for all of the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, every woman was having 6 kids, then 5 kids, then 4, then 3. We're actually down to 2.3 children per woman now. And if we continue through empowering strategies towards women and girls, we can get that well below 2. Into below replacement value fertility. The second curve is that of the energy transition. Not only do we need to hasten the demographic transition, we need to hasten the energy transition away from carbon-based energy sources and also transition away from the amount of energy that we all use per capita. The profligate use of energy is simply unnecessary, and I think all of us have come to appreciate that in much of our modern lives, waiting for a system that can help us transition away. And the third curve that I think that all of us need to contribute to is a reduction in hyperconsumption. All of us understand that we purchase a lot. That means a lot is made for us. And if only we can actually have less made because less is being consumed, that will enable us to transition away from so much profligate energy use. And of course, our biggest contribution to carbon output is the number of children that we have. If we could have just one fewer child each, that would bring us well below replacement value fertility, bringing all 3 of those curves downward, inevitably creating more space for us on this finite planet. When women are empowered, educated, integrated in the workforce, and given access to family planning technologies, a number of interesting things start to happen. First of all, when they're in school, they tend to begin having children much later in life. Second, when they have control of their own fertility, they tend to space out their children in ways that are advantageous to both raising the children and to living a more sane life. And in addition to that, they often choose to have fewer children. And that's not to tell people how many children to have, but many people who have 6 children who said, I would have liked to have stopped at 4, or have 3 and said, I really would have liked to have 2, or only have 1, or maybe choose to have none at all. When they have access to the empowering tools, when they are given the resources, when they have the education, they often make completely different choices for themselves and their family, and that leads to a very different balance between humanity and the planet that we live on. I think each of the methods for permanently sequestering carbon that Peter calls out in his book are fundamentally different in kind of the patterns that will be required to make them successful. I think ocean-based iron fertilization for sequestering carbon will require a concerted effort by the scientific community to understand what are the second and third order ecological consequences, the unintended ecological consequences that one may run up against when conducting that kind of operation in different parts of the ocean. Because in the end, right, we need to have a thriving ocean even if we, fuck.
It's all right, I can pick up on
All right, right.
So even though we need a thriving ocean.
Yeah. Because ultimately we need a thriving ocean in order to have an ocean that can help us sequester that carbon through ocean iron fertilization. Other methods, such as aquaculture that uses seaweed to sequester large volumes of carbon, is, I think, much more of like a farming kind of model. So we need many people that are willing to move into that sector of the economy and make it a successful, thriving side of the economy, the same way we've had farmers on land making farming a very successful commercial endeavor. We can have governments and nonprofits help that along, but ultimately we need people like the people watching this show who decide that that is a lifestyle and a thing that they want to do to not only have a successful business and support their family, but also to save the planet. The methods like creating artificial limestone, those are going to be heavy businesses. Those are going to be well-capitalized businesses that are there creating a resource for building our future, literally building it the same way we have businesses that create concrete and create steel and create other building methods. So I think there's a lot of room for capital investment and a lot of room for entrepreneurialism and a lot of room for engineers that want to help us reframe how we do this in the future. And then what do we have for the third one?
Oh, and the last
or the fourth one.
Methane, I guess.
Sorry. Methane, I think, poses a very unique challenge because it's the kind of thing that can really just be a lights out scenario tomorrow. We have not only been emitting enormous volumes of methane as a species through the process of industrialization, but we've gotten to the point, because of the transmogrification of our planet's surface and because of the climate change that's already occurred, we have this very frightening set of scenarios where large nature driven belches of methane could actually be lights out for humanity. So I think almost thinking about that in a Manhattan Project sort of way, to be equipped at global scale to deal with the eventuality where large methane dispersions can be combated actively by us as a global species, because that's not something that's going to impact one country or another. It's going to immediately impact the entire globe.
So, on a personal level...
Yeah, well, people often ask me, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? And I'm neither. I'm an opportunist. Every morning you wake up, there's an opportunity for you to do something about this. It's not for other people to do. It's not for a small number of people to do. There's actually things that every single person can do, and you have to make that choice every morning to grab onto that opportunity and make something happen.
And then just...
Yeah, if anything, I feel like the interface between science and politics, or science and policy, really needs to fundamentally change. The scientific community has been self-censoring for just so long, saying, here's the worst case scenario, here's the best case scenario, let's just assume it's somewhere in the middle. But yet every day when we watch the news, it turns out that we're tracking worse than the worst case scenario. And I feel like that has been kind of an internal moral compromise that many in our scientific community have had as they've tried to, in good faith, interface with a hostile political environment, or an environment, policy environment that frankly is just busy and overwhelmed with the crisis of the day. So, you know, I think that we need to rethink that interface between how we talk about the science that there's consensus around, the science that we actually know, and how it's communicated to our decision makers, and the pressure that we put on our decision makers. In most reasonable scenarios, you would adopt the precautionary principle. You know, if indeed it's lights out, if this small probability thing occurs, then we would pile in all of our resources to make sure that that thing never occurs. But instead we've said, you know, we might destroy our planet in the worst case scenario, but you know, let's just assume we won't have a worst case scenario so that we don't really have to do anything. And I think, you know, that's a set of habits that we collectively have to get away from.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
All right. Can I just do one more thing, because it's going to end up. So when we're talking about the empowerment of women and girls, I think it's really, really important to understand and to remember that the empowerment of women and girls is a good in and of itself. Right? It's not an instrumentality. It's not something we should do because it might be useful to us and the planet. It's something that we should be doing globally. We should be doing locally. We should be doing at every level because it's a good thing to be done in and of itself. On top of that, it just turns out that that is the key to unlocking, right, a path towards a more sustainable planet. And I think, you know, when I talk to women and girls around the world, when they find out that the empowerment of women and girls is actually the way you can combat climate change, they ask me, why is this the first time I've heard anyone talking about this? This makes me angry. I'm in my 70s. I've been living this as an advocate for 30 or 40 years. Why is this the first time I've heard it? So I would just encourage all of us to make sure that this isn't the first time or the last time people hear this, right? Investment in women and girls, their empowerment, their education, integration in the workforce, and access to family planning technologies is not only a good in and of itself, right? It is actually the path to achieving balance between our species and the planet that supports us.
Wow, thanks.